Hey everyone, and welcome to our Chapter 15 lecture. This week we are talking about behavioral disorders. So this could be one of the most interesting chapters that we cover. It's also got a lot of information in it, so this lecture is going to be pretty long. There's like 80 something slides, so bear with me. Also feel free to, break this up into two sections if it just feels like too much info coming at you at once. So on that note, let's begin. Oh wait, one other thing I wanted to say. As we're talking about behavioral disorders and we're having discussion posts about them and all of that, please remember that people in this course could have one of these disorders, or one of their family members could have a disorder that we're going to talk about. So please, let's just remember to be really respectful and not make any comments that could be taken as derogatory or could hurt someone's feelings. So I just wanted to put that out there. Okay, so the first thing to do is to define abnormal behavior. So there is no universally accepted definition of mental illness or abnormality. However, psychologists who specialize in studying abnormal behavior tend to emphasize a common core four criteria that may be used to distinguish between normal and abnormal behavior. So abnormal behavior is atypical, maladaptive, socially unacceptable, and produces emotional discomfort. Okay, so the four criteria that are used to distinguish between normal and abnormal behavior are atypicality, dysfunctional, distressful, meaning emotional distress, and dangerous. So atypical, atypical means obviously not typical, but rarity alone is not a sufficient criterion for determining that a behavior is normal or disorder. Okay, so this would be like some of the most brilliant people in the world are maybe a little bit atypical. So that is not in itself enough to justify criteria for a disorder. Dysfunctional is the impaired ability to function adequately in everyday social and occupational roles. So this means that somebody's atypical behavior is actually causing dysfunction and they can't function in society. And then emotional distress could take the form of anxiety, depression, or agitation. And these behaviors, the behaviors of behaviorally disordered people, may be judged as dangerous to themselves or others, although although people with behavioral disorders such as anxiety, depression, or even schizophrenia are rarely in danger of inflicting injury to themselves or to others. I think that sometimes in our society there's a real stigma that's placed on mental illness, and we feel very afraid of people who have some psychotic behaviors because it's very different and it can be a little bit alarming. But it's really important to remember that most of these people are not dangerous. And so keep that in mind. Okay, I want to go back to that slide really quickly and just talk briefly too a little bit about, as we talk about these disorders, please keep in mind that this is through our cultural lens, okay? This is all through sort of Western medicine, and it's really important to remember that sometimes, like, we may consider talking to oneself or hallucinating to be clear signs of a serious behavioral disorder, but these very same views, these very same behaviors are viewed in other cultures around the world as being indicative of somebody being connected to God or a deity or a shaman. Okay, so just keep in mind too, important to keep cultural awareness as we talk about mental health issues. Okay, this, if you read the little vignette here at the start of the chapter, these are examples of letters written from a mental patient to the director of the state hospital. This one, this patient was being treated for a severe mood disorder, so you can see the writing's pretty neat. The content doesn't make sense, but the writing is neat. and a little more rational than this. This is doodling produced by a patient diagnosed with schizophrenia. So you can see that with the mood disorder, there's not quite the same level of disorganized thought as there is with the schizophrenic patient. And here's the schizophrenic patient again. You can see some religious and sexual themes here in this picture. Both of those things are very common for people who are struggling with schizophrenia. Those are very common fixations and hallucinations, religion and sex. Okay, so as we talked about, definitions of what is normal are both culturally based and era dependent, right? So things that also important to remember, some things that probably we find pretty acceptable today, think about 50 years ago, right? Probably not quite the same, so keep that in mind. And all four characteristics below are not necessarily evident in all behavioral disorders, okay? So like I was saying, especially I would say the dangerous one, there's a lot of people that have a type of behavioral disorder and are definitely not dangerous. But in order for a disorder to be diagnosed as a disorder, it does have to be causing significant distress and dysfunction, okay? So because we all go through times of feeling some anxiety or feeling a little down, that's not enough to warrant a diagnosis of anxiety or depression. It has to be causing clinical significance, clinical impairment in daily function in order for it to be classified as a disorder. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how we classify behavioral disorders. So the American Psychiatric Association in 1952 first published the DSM, which stands for the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, okay? In 1968, you can see the timeline here, okay? And then 2013, DSM-5, okay? So this is what we're currently using as the DSM-5, which is the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, okay? Okay, so the first sort of category of disorders we're going to talk about are anxiety disorders. So anxiety may be described as a generalized feeling of dread or apprehension, typically accompanied by a variety of physiological reactions, such as increased heart rate, rapid shallow breathing, sweating, muscle tension, or dry mouth. Fear is different from anxiety in that fear has a very obvious cause and it will subside. Anxiety is less clearly linked, and this may be more pervasive. Okay, so whereas you might have a reaction of fear to something, as soon as the thing that makes you afraid is gone, you're going to feel that subside, and you can clearly say, oh, I was afraid because that person jumped out from behind the wall, right, and scared me. Anxiety is not like that. Anxiety has a lot of the same feelings as fear, but there's not a clear reason for it, and it doesn't necessarily just all of a sudden go away. So 40 million Americans may suffer from one of the following anxiety disorders: panic disorder, social phobia, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, or generalized anxiety disorder, and we're going to talk about those more in depth. All right, so panic disorder. The National Institute of Mental Health estimates that approximately 6 million Americans suffer from panic attacks each year. And panic disorder is an anxiety disorder in which an individual experiences numerous panic attacks, 4 or more in a 4-week period, that are characterized by overwhelming terror and often a feeling of unreality or depersonalization. So there's a little example of this in your textbook here on page 593 about Susan. So Susan began her day as she always had. She rose early before her husband started the coffee and headed to the shower. She was rehearsing how she would conduct her sales meeting later in the morning when she began to feel as if someone or something had taken control of her body. Her heart rate jumped from a normal 65 to over 150 BPM in an instant. Her respiration was strained, and she could not get air into her lungs. She grabbed the bathroom counter as she began to lose balance in a spinning room. Her skin felt cold and clammy, but at the same time she felt as if she were burning alive. A terror like she had never experienced overwhelmed her as she realized she must be having a heart attack and was now dying. She tried to scream out, but could not even make a sound. She was paralyzed with fear, knowing she was going to die in her bathroom. Susan felt as though an hour had passed when she realized that her breathing was now under control. She took long, deep breaths as her racing heart slowed back towards normal. Susan got up from the floor, not even remembering the fall. At that moment, her husband walked in carrying her morning coffee. She then realized this is all it had occurred within just a few minutes. Okay, so that's a little example of what a panic attack can feel like. Panic attacks associated with a panic disorder may be so overwhelming that a person may have thoughts of suicide. Others may have a sense of derealization, the feeling that the world is not real, or depersonalization, a loss of sense of personal identity manifested as feeling detached from one's body. Physical symptoms of a panic attack include rapid heartbeat, labored breathing, dizziness, chest pain, sweating, feelings of choking or suffocating. Okay, agoraphobia is a majority of panic disorder cases may also exhibit symptoms of agoraphobia, which is an anxiety disorder characterized by an intense fear of being in places or situations from which escape might be difficult, or in which help might not be available, such as stores, theaters, and trains. This often accompanies a panic disorder, which is known as panic disorder with agoraphobia, and in some cases, agoraphobia is a standalone disorder. So agoraphobia is only one of several kinds of phobias. A phobia is any number of anxiety disorders that are characterized by a persistent fear and consequent avoidance of a specific object or situation. I'm sure you've all seen the fantastic film Arachnophobia. Just kidding, it's not wonderful. But an example of a phobia can include snakes, spiders, heights, water, being alone, things like that. Phobias are among the most common behavioral disorder, and approximately 14% of the general population has a phobia. Okay, phobias are among the most common behavioral disorder, and approximately 14% of the general population has a phobia. Here you have a list of phobias, so you can take a look at that. This puppy is on page 595 in your textbook. Okay, then we have social anxiety disorder. So this is an anxiety disorder characterized by a persistent, irrational fear of performing some specific behavior, such as talking or eating in the presence of other people, also called social phobia. Persons often avoid situations in which they may be observed behaving in an ineffective or embarrassing manner, and some have a poor self-image, difficulty interacting with authority figures, especially like teachers, police officers, those people can cause an elevated feeling of anxiety. This is different, again, remember this is different than being a little bit nervous before you get up in front of your class to give a speech, right? This is persistent irrational fear, okay, and can make it impossible for somebody to talk to people, to go out to eat with people, all of those things, right? So remember, it's got to be causing clinical significant impairment to be a disorder. There are two forms of social anxiety disorder. One is performance anxiety, and this reflects fear of specific situations such as public speaking or acting. This social phobia is manageable by avoiding such situations, yet this limits one's career growth and full potential. And then social anxiety may impose more serious limitations by causing individuals to avoid all kinds of social situations in both professional and personal activities. Specific phobia. This is an anxiety disorder characterized by an irrational fear of specific situations or objects, such as heights, small closed places, strangers, or animals. Although these are the most common phobic disorders, they are the least disruptive and seen less frequently in clinical settings. And then we have generalized anxiety disorder. This is a chronic state of free-floating anxiety or worry that has persisted for at least 6 months. This occurs across a wide range of situations and is not linked to specific eliciting stimuli or events. Per the DSM-5, 3 of the following symptoms must be present for the last 6 months: restlessness, feeling easily fatigued, poor concentration, irritability, muscle tension, and sleep disturbances. Again, generalized anxiety is different than being in a stressful situation and feeling some sort of anxiety about that, like having a test coming up and feeling anxious about that test is very different than generalized anxiety disorder. Generalized anxiety disorder is a free-floating anxiety, so it's not linked to one specific thing, and it persists for at least 6 months, okay? Okay, obsessive compulsive disorder. Per the DSM-5, obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, is no longer listed as an anxiety disorder. It has its own category called obsessive compulsive and related disorders. Okay, so obsessive compulsive disorder is an anxiety disorder characterized by persistent, unwanted, and unshakable thoughts and/or irresistible habitual repeated actions. Approximately 2.5% of Americans who have the disorder know that their obsessive thoughts and compulsive actions are irrational, yet they cannot block these unwanted thoughts to keep from performing the act. So sometimes I think that, people say things like, oh, I'm so OCD about keeping my room clean. So important to remember that obsessive compulsive disorder is pretty intense for people, and it's not just sort of really wanting to keep your room clean. It's actually feeling like if they don't really keep their room clean, they're going to have obsessive thinking about how dirty it is. So they won't be able to stop the thoughts, and even though they know that the thought is irrational, they can't stop from thinking about it. So like somebody who's got OCD who washes their hands constantly until they're raw and bleeding, because they're so afraid of germs. The reason that they're doing that is because that compulsive action helps them feel like they're not going to have really scary intrusive thoughts obsessively about germs. So sometimes I feel like, again, in our culture, in our society, this term gets thrown around pretty loosely, and sort of made fun of a little bit. Keep in mind, this is a pretty serious disorder for people, and it causes a lot of significant distress. So just think about that as you're coming out of this class and hopefully learning a little more about what some of these things mean for people that have them. Okay, next we have post-traumatic stress disorder. Per the DSM-5, post-traumatic stress disorder is no longer listed as an anxiety disorder. It has its own category called trauma and stressor-related disorders. So post-traumatic stress disorder is an anxiety disorder that typically follows a traumatic event or events and is characterized by reliving the event, avoidance of stimuli associated with the event, and numbing of general responsiveness and increased arousal. Okay, so post-traumatic stress disorder, in order for this to be a diagnosis that's made, somebody has to either feel that their life is in danger, and they're going to die, or witnessing an experience where somebody else is in that situation, a life-threatening situation. People with post-traumatic stress disorder oftentimes can be sort of frazzled, jumpy, right? Elevated, heightened arousal, increased arousal. Another way it can look, though, is people feel very, very numb and don't have much of an arousal reaction to anything because they've sort of numbed themselves out, okay? Involved actual or threatened death or serious injury. The person must have also experienced intense fear, helplessness, or horror. So primary symptoms: re-experiencing the event, flashbacks, avoidance of reminders of events, smells, sounds, places, negative alterations in cognition and mood, hypervigilance. Hypervigilance means looking all around you, being extra vigilant because of your aroused nervous system reaction. Easily started, irritable, poor concentration. Okay. This can be explained largely, if not solely, on environmental grounds. So examples include military combat, rape, physical and or sexual assault or abuse, and surviving a serious vehicular accident. So prime examples of this, the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, also war, people coming home from war, and also absolutely any sort of sexual assault causes post-traumatic stress disorder. Can cause. Doesn't always. That's important to remember too. Not everybody who goes through a traumatic situation is going to have post-traumatic stress disorder, okay? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about perspectives on anxiety disorder. So psychoanalytic, you remember, is Mr. Freud. This perspective is that anxiety disorders are a result of internal conflicts, particularly those involving sexual or aggressive impulses. Symptoms of anxiety disorders appear when the defense mechanisms are overused or rigidly applied, or when they fail. And phobias may occur if the individual displaces anxiety to some object, situation, or social function that can be avoided. Okay, so he's saying that phobias happen because that's a displacement of the anxiety. So here we have little Hans as an example, had a phobic fear of horses. This was one of Freud's most famous cases. It was a 5-year-old boy whose phobic fear of horses kept him from going outside his house. Freud concluded that Hans's fear of horses was an expression of anxieties related to an edible complex. He unconsciously feared and hated his father, whom he perceived as a rival for his mother's affections, and he displaced this fear onto horses, which he could more easily avoid than his father. Okay, so that's Freud's very complicated explanation of that phobia. Panic disorders and agoraphobia may be rooted in an unresolved separation anxiety early in life, fear of being separated from one's parents. And obsessive compulsive disorder is seen as a result of a fixation at the anal stage of psychosexual development, anal retentive or anal expulsive. Okay. So, talking a little bit more about this, Freud believed that when children are subjected to harsh toilet training experience, they react with anger and aggressive urges that must be controlled if punishment is to be avoided. The persistent thoughts or repetitive behavioral rituals associated with this disorder serve to dissipate angry feelings before they can be translated into aggressive acts. The fact that compulsive behavior rituals often involve cleanliness themes lends support to Freud's contention that such neurotic acts reflect fixation during the anal period, a time focused on mastering unclean bowel and bladder functions. Okay, behavioral perspective on anxiety disorder. So behavioral psychologists see conditioning as the source of anxiety disorder. So Pavlovian conditioning explains phobias as the result of learned associations between previously neutral stimuli and frightening events. Once fear or anxiety is conditioned to certain stimuli, people may then learn to reduce this conditioned fear by avoiding the fear stimulus. So avoidance learning. A person avoids their fear of elevators by using stairs, which we all remember, this is negative reinforcement. Avoidance behavior is maintained by negative reinforcement, right? Fear reduction. Certain brain structures may be involved in mediating conditioned fear, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, which do not turn off normally in some people. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about what that is, okay? So recent experimental work with animals supports the idea that the amygdala is essential for the development of conditioned fear responses. In addition, during the course of fear conditioning, cells in the amygdala begin to fire with the onset of a conditioned stimulus that precedes shock. So while the amygdala appears to be important in the acquisition of conditioned fear, The prefrontal cortex seems to be responsible for the extinction of conditioned fear. Animals with prefrontal cortex damage fail to extinguish conditioned fear when the unconditioned stimulus is no longer presented. People with post-traumatic stress syndrome also show a failure to extinguish conditioned fear responses. Perhaps anxiety disorders result when people can no longer turn off or inhibit conditioned fear responses. Okay? Two theories stand out as plausible explanation for phobias. One is that evolution may have built a biological predisposition into humans to react fearfully to certain classes of potentially dangerous stimuli, right? Snakes and spiders and all those things. Albert Bandura, who was the social learning theory guy, believed that modeling or imitating the behavior of others provides a more likely explanation for the acquisition of some anxiety disorders. This is supported by evidence that animal phobias typically occur in children at about age 5 and whose parents have the same phobia. PTSD is clearly linked to traumatizing experiences and possibly the failure to inhibit conditioned fear responses. OCD, on the other hand, is more complex. Some argue that compulsive acts occur repeatedly as they temporarily reduce anxiety and provide negative reinforcement. Okay? In the case of panic attacks with agoraphobia, it has been suggested that individuals who experience sudden panic attacks develop a kind of anticipatory anxiety attached to situations in which they have previously experienced attacks. Several researchers have suggested that some individuals with unusually responsive nervous systems may be biologically predisposed to develop certain anxiety disorders, in particular panic, phobic, and generalized anxiety disorders. Rappaport believed that certain behavioral subroutines are hardwired into the human brain over the course of evolution. These, as she refers to them, behavioral packages, are believed to have served crucial functions during the evolution of the human species. Okay? The repository of these behavioral packages is presumed to be within the basal ganglia. Basal ganglia, group of brain structures that lie under the cerebral cortex and function as way stations between the input of sensory messages and resulting cortically initiated motor or cognitive output. Okay? Rappaport theorizes that in OCD patients, disturbances in these way stations have somehow short-circuited the loop that normally connects sensory input with behavioral output, thereby releasing stored hardwire behavioral packages. Okay? Oh, here we go. Jumping ahead of myself. Also, dopamine dysfunction in the basal ganglia may underlie OCD. Interestingly, drugs that increase GABA activity are typically used to treat anxiety disorders, and drugs that inhibit the synthesis of GABA or block GABA receptors and its ability to inhibit target neurons produce anxiety in both humans and animals. And given the above, anxiety disorders may result from GABA dysfunction in the frontal cortices and the amygdala. Okay, somatic symptom disorder. This is characterized by multiple and recurrent physical symptoms that have no physical cause. Common complaints include headaches, heart palpitations, vomiting, dizziness and fainting, chest, stomach, and back pain, and this affects less than 1% of the population. Okay, so we were just talking about somatic symptom disorder. And now we're going to talk about illness anxiety disorder. So illness anxiety disorder is a disorder in which the individual is excessively fearful of contracting a serious illness or of dying. The most common complaint is about stomach and heart problems, and there's fear that their symptoms indicate a serious disease compared to those with somatization disorder who keep their concerns. And there's an overutilization of health care resources with this illness anxiety disorder. So the difference here is with somatization disorder, these people are really experiencing symptoms. They're not looking to, they don't have fear that that means that they're dying, right? Illness anxiety disorder is different because these are people where this comes with a great deal of anxiety that something must be really wrong when they have a symptom. Okay, conversion disorder. This is a somatic symptom disorder that is manifested as a sensory or motor system disorder for which there is no known organic cause. Okay, so this is really interesting. Symptom presentation makes no anatomical sense, and in sensory conversion, individuals may lose sensitivity in specific parts of their bodies in which the loss of feeling pattern is neurologically impossible. So, for example, in motor conversion, an individual may experience paralysis in some part of the body, usually a limb, or experience uncontrollable tremors or twitches. Conversion disorders present after a person has experienced serious stress or conflict, and the symptoms provide a means of escape or avoidance from that stress or conflict. Part of this symptomology is called labile indifference, or the noble lack of concern. This is sort of a blasé attitude about one's condition. And presentation of conversion disorder is different than those who are malingering, as those with conversion disorder are more willing and open to discuss their condition. So I'm going to read this little example to you because this is kind of, it's good to have an example. It's a little hard to understand. So for example, we have Phil here on page 603, who's 40 years of age, had a history of marginal work adjustment since his discharge from the Army at age 25. In the 15 years since discharge, he had depended on public assistance and financial aid from relatives to get by. He painted a very dismal picture of his married life as one of almost constant harassment from his wife and his mother-in-law. He had a history of minor illnesses involving his eyes, none of which had grossly affected his visual acuity. During the Christmas season, his wife and mother-in-law were being more demanding than usual, requiring him to work nights and weekends at various chores under their foremanship. 3 days before Christmas, while shopping with his wife and mother-in-law, Phil suddenly became blind in both eyes. Neurological and ophthalmological exams were essentially negative in accounting for his blindness, and a diagnosis of conversion disorder was made. At this time, Phil did not seem greatly alarmed by his loss of sight, but instead displayed an attitude of patient forbearance. Observers in the hospital noticed that Phil could get about in the ward better than expected for a totally blind man. He was not concerned with this, but felt hurt and unjustly accused when other patients pointed out the discrepancy to him. Okay, so Phil goes blind in both eyes. No physiological reason for that. And he's just not that worried about it. Okay, so that's conversion disorder. So the psychoanalytic perspective on somatic symptom disorders. Freud explained somatoform disorders as a result of unresolved sexual impulses, particularly Oedipal complexes. Unresolved incestuous yearning produces intense anxiety, which the individual may convert into physical symptoms. This conversion reduces the anxiety associated with repressed id impulses, a process called primary gain. Secondary gain may result from allowing the person to avoid or escape their current stressful life situation. And the behaviorist perspective, behaviorists view symptoms as a negative reinforcer if they allow the person to escape or avoid the stressful situation. So they're saying that because it gets them out of that situation, that's what's causing the symptoms. Okay, next we have dissociative disorder. Dissociative disorders are a group of disorders including psychogenic amnesia, depersonalization, derealization disorder, and dissociative identity disorder, in which the thoughts and feelings that generate anxiety are separated or dissociated from conscious awareness. Okay? So, important to remember that oh, I'm sorry. Never mind. I'm jumping ahead of myself. First, we're talking about dissociative amnesia. This is memory loss not attributable to disease or brain injury, and it's the most common dissociative disorder. This is sudden loss of memory, usually after a particularly stressful or traumatic event. It may happen that the person blocks out all memory of the event, and this may last several hours to many years. Typically, the symptoms of this disappear as suddenly as they appeared, and they rarely recur. Then we have depersonalization, derealization disorder. This is a persistent detachment from one's thoughts, feelings, or body sensations. The individual may have the feelings of being outside of their body, as if watching from a detached perspective, and they may also experience a detachment from their immediate surroundings, as if in a dreamlike state. Okay, then dissociative identity disorder is a condition of separation in personality not attributable to disease or brain injury. This is what was formerly known as multiple personality disorder, which I'm sure you've probably heard of. This is a highly uncommon form of dissociative disorder in which the person alternates between an original or primary personality, the host, and one or more secondary or subordinate personalities, the alters. The subordinate alter personalities are aware of the primary host personality, but not vice versa, okay? So the host personality is not aware of the subordinates. DID, this is what the abbreviation for dissociative identity disorder, seems to occur more frequently in women than in men, and it affects women 9 times more than men. But remember, really, really rare. There's a case here outlined in your book, the case of Trudy Chase, who supposedly displayed 92 separate personalities. Apparently, they began to emerge at the age of 2, and they replaced Trudy, the original personality, who was asleep. So, very interesting. Childhood trauma, and particularly sexual trauma, appears to be associated. But not all psychologists agree that there's a causal relation there. Okay. So theoretical perspectives on dissociative disorders. The psychoanalytic perspective, all disorders seem to provide strong support for Freud's view that excessive application of the defense mechanisms can lead to serious disorders. These conditions are the result of massive reliance on repression to ward off unacceptable impulses, particularly those of a sexual nature. Behavioral theory does not offer a well-developed and cohesive explanation, and there is no evidence that biological predispositions play a significant role in the development of dissociative disorders. Okay, depressive disorders. This is a class of disorders including major depression, dysthymic disorders, and substance-induced depression that are characterized by persistent depression. Depression may be a secondary condition to other symptoms, and in contrast, depression is the primary problem in depressive disorders. That's a little bit confusing the way that slide is written. Let's just be honest with ourselves. So, again, remember, we have all experienced times in our lives where we have felt depressed, right? When you have maybe lost a job, failed a test, broke up with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, that can make people feel depressed. This is different because it's persistent, okay? And again, causing clinical impairment. So first, we're going to talk about major depressive disorder. This is a severe mood disorder characterized by deep and persistent depression. DSM-5 criteria state that the individual has 5 of 9 symptoms for at least a 2-week period. Not everyone who has depression becomes suicidal, and the symptoms impact social and occupational functioning. Okay, remember that. They have to be causing clinical impairment. So 5 or more of the following symptoms have been present during a 2-week period and represent a change from previous functioning. At least one of the symptoms is either depressed mood or loss of interest or pleasure. This is the DSM-5 criteria for diagnosis. So depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day. markedly diminished interest or pleasure in all or almost all activities most of the day, nearly every day, significant weight loss when not dieting or weight gain, decrease or increase in appetite. And then insomnia or hypersomnia nearly every day. So insomnia, you're not sleeping. Hypersomnia, all you're doing is sleeping. Symptoms of major depressive disorder continued: psychomotor agitation or retardation. So either talking too fast or not being able to talk. Fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day. Feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt nearly every day. Diminished ability to think or concentrate or indecisiveness nearly every day. Recurrent thoughts of death, not just a fear of dying, but sort of just thinking about of death, and generally not feeling afraid. Recurrent suicidal ideation with a specific plan, or a suicide attempt or a specific plan for committing suicide. Okay, so talking about suicide, when somebody is talking about having thoughts of suicide, there's a way sort of to determine how serious that is, and we do that in the mental health world by figuring out if they have a specific plan for how to commit suicide. Suicidal thoughts are very different than thoughts of death, okay? Sometimes people with clinical depression may think something like, oh, it would just be better off, everyone would be better off if I wasn't here anymore, okay? That's very different than somebody thinking, I'm going to kill myself and this is how I'm going to do it, all right? So that's just some information about that suicidal ideation. So the depression associated with major depressive disorder typically causes a person to become lethargic and sleep more. Major depressive disorder is characterized by insomnia and agitation, so irritability. 1 in 5 Americans may experience a severe depressive episode at any point in time, but only 1% of the population has been diagnosed with major depressive disorder. Ratio of women to men with depression is 2 to 1, and it is estimated that about 20 million people in America suffer from a depression severe enough to interfere with their life each year. Depression may lead to substance abuse and eating disorders, and the economic impact of depression exceeds $90 billion a year. Okay, next we're talking about bipolar disorder. So this is a mood disorder characterized by intermittent episodes of both depression and mania. Mania is highly energized behavior, and we're going to talk more in detail about that. This is what used to be called manic depressive disorder. Bipolar presents in the early 20s, and depression may present at any time, but may often present in a person's 30s. About 1 in 100 people suffer from bipolar disorder, which is similar to the rate of schizophrenia, but far lower than the incidence of major depression. So this is not very common. Men and women are equally likely to develop bipolar disorder, and there is a higher likelihood of attempted and completed suicides among those with bipolar disorder than any other behavioral disorder. And here we have table 15.2. This is on page 611 of your book. And this is some suicide facts. If you ever feel like anyone you know is running a risk for suicide, make sure that you call a suicide prevention hotline, have them call a suicide prevention hotline. They need to get help. Okay, let me just see here. What are we doing? Okay, so with bipolar disorder, there can be delusions, which is an exaggerated and rigidly held belief that has little or no basis in fact. There can also be hallucinations. These are kind of things that generally people just associate with schizophrenia, but they can be present in other things as well. Hallucinations, false perception that lacks a sensory basis that can be produced by hallucinogenic drugs, fatigue, or sensory deprivation. Auditory hallucinations can be associated with severe psychotic disorders. Auditory hallucinations are the most common. Visual, tactile, gustatory, and olfactory hallucinations may occur. Hold on. What did I do? Okay, here we go. Okay, so here's the criteria for bipolar disorder. So mania, period of at least 1 week of abnormally and persistently elevated, expansive, or irritable mood, severe enough to cause significant impairment in social, occupational, interpersonal functioning, or warrants hospitalization. Presence of 3 or more out of 7 specific symptoms listed in the DSM-5. Psychotic features can be present. Okay, so mania. Let's talk a little bit more about mania. So mania is a period of extreme sort of euphoria, almost, and super impulsive. Think about, if you just decided that, or you felt so energized that you were going to go do everything that you've ever wanted to do, regardless of how much it costs, regardless of how dangerous it is, and you felt like you didn't need to sleep. People with mania are typically only sleeping maybe 3 hours a night and not feeling tired. This is also can be a period of extreme creativity for people, these manic episodes. This is when artists with bipolar create their, most beautiful artwork. Generally speaking, people with bipolar disorder have a hard time giving up the manic episodes on medication, because it's extremely exciting period of time, and they feel grandiose is part of this, the symptoms, grandiosity, feelings of invincibility. So it's hard for them to let that go, although the depression on the other side of it can be awful. So hypomania is a period of at least 4 days of a persistently elevated, expansive, or irritable mood, clearly different from the non-depressed mood state. Presence are 3 or more out of 7 specific symptoms, but not severe enough to cause marked impairment in social, occupational, or interpersonal functioning. Does not necessitate hospitalization, and there are no psychotic features, okay? So mania is much more extreme, and this is bipolar affective disorder 1 or bipolar 1 has mania. Hypomania is in bipolar 2, okay? Then we have mixed episode, mixed mania. The criteria are simultaneously met for both a manic episode and for a major depressive episode, except for duration, nearly every day during at least a 1 week period. Criteria are met both for manic episode and for a major depressive episode. The mood disturbance is sufficiently severe to cause marked impairment in occupational functioning or in usual social activities or relationships with others. The disturbance is not due to the direct physiological effects of a substance or a general medical condition. Symptoms of bipolar disorder. Okay, so in a manic episode, inflated self-esteem or grandiosity, decreased need for sleep, more talkative than usual, or pressure to keep talking. Like it feels like this person just literally can't stop talking, and they're talking really fast and maybe loudly. Flights of ideas or racing thoughts, distractibility, increase in goal-directed activity, work, school, sexually, socially, excessive involvement in pleasurable activities that have a high potential for painful consequences, spending sprees, sexual indiscretions, foolish business investments, that kind of thing. Okay, so that's bipolar disorder. And now we're going to talk about seasonal affective disorder. This is a diagnostic category in which major depression or bipolar depression recurrently follows a seasonal pattern. So recurrent winter depression presents with carbohydrate cravings, overeating, weight gain, and oversleeping, and may be caused by reduced light exposure. Phototherapy could be helpful. And recurrent summer depression presents with a loss of appetite, weight loss, and insomnia. So, perspective on depressive disorders. The psychoanalytic. Depressive disorders are rooted in oral fixation as individuals develop ambivalent, as individuals develop ambivalent feelings toward their mother, they transfer these feelings to others and ultimately they are unable to relate to people they love. Excessive love toward the self results in mania. Exaggerated self-hatred results in depression. And Freud theorized that fixation causes a person to depend too heavily on others for gratification of basic needs and for maintaining self-esteem. Depressive disorders were rooted in relationships of overdependence and ambivalent feelings of love and hate. Okay, the behavioral perspective on depressive disorders. The death, separation, or loss of a loved one means the loss of a primary source of positive reinforcement, which may result in depression due to falling into a rut of loneliness. Other sources of loss include the loss of a job, a significant move, or a prolonged illness. And then learned helplessness. This is a diminished ability to learn an avoidance response following exposure to unavoidable aversive stimulation. This may contribute to some forms of depression and non-responsiveness in human and other animals. Genetics. The average concordance rate for identical twins, 65%, is almost 5 times that for fraternal twins for depressive disorders. And for identical twins are much higher for bipolar than unipolar depression, 72% versus 40%. And among identical twins, higher in severe rather than milder forms of mood disorders. So clearly a genetic link there. And then brain biochemistry. So in the 1950s, 2 classes of drugs were discovered: monoamine oxidase inhibitors and tricyclics. These increase the brain levels of serotonin and norepinephrine. So monoamine theory. The first formal biochemical theory of mood disorders proposes that depression is related to reduction in activity of the monoamine neurotransmitters, norepinephrine and or serotonin, in specific regions in the brain. And the winter form of seasonal affective disorder may be induced by too much melatonin or by excessively prolonged secretions of melatonin. Melatonin is melatonin is a brain chemical that makes you sleepy, okay? So both serotonin and melatonin systems are influenced by the Earth's daily dark light cycle, okay? So that probably has an impact in seasonal affective disorder. Okay, moving along to schizophrenia. This is a class of severe and disabling mental disorders characterized by extreme disruptions of perceptions, thoughts, emotions, and behavior. This typically emerges in early adulthood and is a chronic, lifelong illness with some periods of remission. It affects about 1% of people worldwide at any given point, and it is estimated that 3 out of every 100 people may experience this disorder throughout their lives. It also presents equally across both sexes. It typically emerges in early adulthood. Oh, I did say that. Okay, good. Okay, so Emil Kraepelin originally named this dementia praecox. Praecox meaning early onset and characterized by a progressive intellectual deterioration or dementia. And then we have Eugene Bleuler, who later changed the name to schizophrenia to describe the primary symptom, a disassociation of thought from appropriate emotions caused by a splitting off of the parts of the mind. This does not mean split personality, though. Okay, split personality. Then we're going back to that dissociative identity disorder. Okay, that's not schizophrenia. Primary symptoms of schizophrenia: delusions and disturbances of thought, disturbances of content, actual ideas expressed, thought content, and disturbances of form, the manner in which ideas are organized, so the thought process. There's also disturbance in emotional expression. And this may take the form of blunted or flat affect, characterized by a dramatic lack of emotional expression. So monotone speech and little or no facial expression whatsoever, okay? So here's table 15.3 on page 616 of your book. And here's some more information about some of these delusions. So delusion of influence, a belief that others are influencing one by means of wires, TV, and so on, making one do things against one's will. Delusion of grandeur, belief that one is in actuality some great world or historical figure, such as Napoleon. Delusion of persecution, belief that one is being persecuted, hunted, or interfered with by certain individuals or organized groups. Delusion of reference, the belief that others are talking about one and that one is being included in TV shows or plays or referred to in news articles. Delusion of bodily changes, the belief that one's body is changing in some unusual way. For example, that the blood is turning to snakes or the flesh to concrete. Delusion of nihilism, the belief that nothing really exists, that all things are simply shadows, also common in the idea that one has really been dead for many years and is observing the world from afar. So primary symptoms of schizophrenia: hallucinations and disturbance of perception. Disturbed perception may include changes in how the body feels or a feeling of depersonalization that makes a person feel detached from their body. Hallucinations are quite common. Most common is auditory, so hearing voices. And the voices that schizophrenics hear, they may be derogatory. You are worthless, or telling them to do something that they don't want to do, but threatening them if they don't do that. Then we have disturbances in speech. Mutism, an individual may not utter a sound for hours or days at a time. And then echolalia. The person repeats virtually every statement they hear uttered. And then there's also disorganized or catatonic behavior. So catatonic behavior is characterized by a severe rigidness of posture that can be maintained for hours. Okay, so in the development of schizophrenia, there's different stages here. And the first stage is prodromal stage. This is the deterioration of function without being actively psychotic. This appears in adolescence or early adulthood and may last for months or even years. Then it moves to the active stage. This is the appearance of major symptoms. So this is disorganized thinking, delusions, and hallucinations show up. And this may last for months to a lifetime. And then there's the residual stage. This is continued impairment, but no severe psychotic symptoms. It's presenting low motivation, blunted affect, and unusual perceptual experiences. So there's subtypes of schizophrenia that we're going to talk about now. The following subtypes have been eliminated by the DSM-5 due to limited diagnostic stability, low reliability, and poor validity: disorganized, catatonic, paranoid, undifferentiated, and residual schizophrenia. They are included for informational purposes only, okay? So the DSM that came out before the 5 is the DSM-4 TR, which is text revision. So the DSM-4 distinguished these 5 subtypes of schizophrenia. So first, there is disorganized. This is characterized by marked disorganization and regression in thinking and behavioral patterns, accompanied by sudden mood swings and often hallucinations. So this included word salad, which is illogical ramblings of speech. Neologisms. This desk is a cram style. He's an Easter horned head. Okay. And then clang, how are you? Well, hell, it's well to tell. So hot, you know it runs on a cot. Okay. Then there's catatonic. This is characterized by extreme psychomotor disturbances, which may range from stuporous immobility to wild excitement and agitation. Paranoid, characterized by the presence of well-organized delusional thoughts. This is the highest level of awareness and least impairment in the ability to carry out daily functions, is paranoid schizophrenia. Then there's undifferentiated, characterized by symptoms which fit no subtype, vague, catch-all category. And then there's residual, describing the recovery phase during which major symptoms are absent or markedly diminished in strength and number, and the person may continue to display blunted or inappropriate emotions. Okay, different symptoms of schizophrenia. There's positive and negative, okay? Positive symptoms represent an excess or distortion of normal behavior of schizophrenia and may include hallucinations, delusions, and excessive verbal behavior. On the other side, negative symptoms represent diminished or absent behavior of schizophrenia and may include flattened emotion, diminished social behavior, apathy, and anhedonia, and catatonic motor behavior. Okay, so positive symptoms, think of like hallucinating, hearing things, all of those kind of things, delusions, okay, and negative, think of just really shut down, catatonic, flat affect, apathy, okay? This is figure 15.3 on page 620 in your book. And this is a PET scan comparing a patient diagnosed with schizophrenia on the right with a normal subject on the left. The color red indicates more frontal lobe activity than blue or yellow. Okay, so you can see very, very different here in the frontal lobe activity. Okay. Okay, psychoanalytic perspective on schizophrenia is Freud believed that schizophrenia occurs when a person's ego either becomes overwhelmed with id demands or is besieged by unbearable guilt. The person undergoes a massive regression back to the oral stage, and regressive symptoms demonstrate a return to the infantile. Restitution symptoms appear in the form of hallucinations, delusions, and bizarre speech patterns. Really important, very few clinicians today place any credibility in Freud's explanation of schizophrenia, right? Because going back to what we just saw in this brain scan, clearly there's some biological factors here, right? Okay. So, behavioral perspective. Learning theorists propose that schizophrenics either have not been reinforced adequately for responding to normal social stimuli, or perhaps have even been punished for such responses. Behavioral theory may have some difficulty explaining why some people become schizophrenic, and behavioral theory may account for the persistence of some abnormal behaviors, and it has been a useful approach in the treatment of schizophrenic behavior. So, helping people with schizophrenia learn what behavior is more appropriate and what's not. Genetics. Family studies have shown a substantially higher incidence of schizophrenia among relatives of schizophrenics than among the general population, and adoption studies have confirmed this. However, genetics cannot account for the disorder 100% of the time. Okay, here we go. Here's rates of schizophrenia between identical and fraternal twins. This table is on page 621 of your book, table 15.4. And brain biochemistry. The dopamine hypothesis suggests that schizophrenia is caused either by abnormally high levels of dopamine or by above normal activity to dopamine due to increased number of dopaminergic receptors. This is supported by research and by medications, such as the phenothiazines, which reduce dopamine activity by blocking the postsynaptic dopamine receptors. And brain structural abnormalities. Structural abnormalities include unusually large ventricles, reduced volume of temporal lobe gray matter, reduced volume of the hippocampus, and an unusually small corpus callosum, which we learned about in an earlier chapter, right? In one of those movies that you watched. Okay, last but not least, I'm going to talk about personality disorders. This is a diverse class of disorders that is collectively characterized by inflexible and maladaptive personality traits that cause either functional impairment or subjective distress. There are 6 related personality disorders: antisocial, avoidant, borderline, narcissistic, obsessive-compulsive, and schizotypal. Personality disorders typically emerge in early childhood, usually no later than adolescence. Very few with personality disorders ever believe that something is wrong with them. It's really important to remember that. And behaviors of rigidity ingrained, highly repetitive, and ultimately self-defeating. And prognosis is poor for overcoming these disorders, as many refuse therapy. Also because inherently in a personality disorder, okay, it's a little different than a mood disorder, for instance, or a schizophrenia, because those disorders, we've found some ways to help with medication. We've found some, changes in the brain, right? Like we were just looking at that scan of schizophrenia. So we can see clearly, like, oh, there's an imbalance here. Okay, with a personality disorder, it's called a personality disorder because it's inherently in the person, this behavior and these things. There is no, there's no brain scan necessarily. Although we'll talk more about this as we talk about this. So, anti-personality disorder. Antisocial personality disorder is what you would think of as somebody who's a psychopath or a sociopath. That's what we used to refer to them as, and now it's antisocial personality disorder. It's characterized by a disregard for the rights of others, lack of remorse or guilt for antisocial acts, irresponsibility in job or marital roles, failure to learn from experience, and profound poverty of deep and lasting emotions, meaning not having deep and lasting emotions, okay? Almost 3% of the population has antisocial personalities, 6 times as many men as women, okay? Criteria from the DSM-5. The person's history dates back to before age 15 and demonstrates a repetitive and persistent pattern of behavior violations, either the basic rights of others or major age-appropriate societal norms or rules. There is also a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others occurring before age 15. Behaviors include, but are not limited to, irresponsibility, impulsivity or failure to plan, deceitfulness, disregard for the safety of self and others, and lack of remorse. Okay, the big one here, guys, when we're talking about this, is lack of remorse. Okay, that's the big one in antisocial personality disorder. Okay, the psychoanalytic perspective. Theorists suggest that because of some aberration in the normal course of early personality development, a person fails to acquire a superego. Remember that your superego is the thing that's all about the morals and the rules, right? And it's sort of, it's the opposite of the id, which is all impulse. So this is saying that for some reason these people are failing to acquire that part of them that's able to say, no, you shouldn't do that because it's immoral. He or she acts to satisfy id instincts without regard for social mores and unhindered by guilt or shame. And the behavioral perspective suggests that people act impulsively and repeatedly manifest antisocial behavior because they have not learned to avoid punishment. And then there's the biological. So here's the interesting thing that I was bringing up when I first started talking about this. Research has shown that 50 to 60% of people with antisocial personality disorder exhibit abnormal brain waves, compared to 10 to 15% of non-disordered people. An EEG analysis has revealed different brainwave patterns when compared to non-disorder. There may be dysfunctions in the limbic system and in the frontal lobe. So it'll be interesting to see what happens as we get better with, our technology improves and we're able to understand what's going on better in the brain, because this might become something that we can pinpoint a little better than just saying it's a personality disorder. For instance, I read not long ago that there was some research being done about perhaps people with antisocial personality disorder don't have the same capacity to experience anxiety than the rest of us, right? So think about when you're a little kid and you get in trouble, that doesn't feel good, right? It makes you feel anxious. It makes you feel like guilty and anxious, and it doesn't feel good. So the theory is that perhaps these people with antisocial personality disorder, they actually don't experience that anxiety. And so therefore they never understand what's wrong because they never feel bad. Um, Also important to remember that, especially recently in the DSM-5, this is on a spectrum, okay? So oftentimes when we think of antisocial personality disorder, we're thinking of, a serial killer. That's not the only way that this can manifest. There's actually a lot of evidence that some of the people that work on Wall Street might be on this spectrum of antisocial personality disorder because of the lack of remorse, right? The lack of remorse, the lack of of care for others, all of those things. It doesn't have to be quite as dramatic as, Jack the Ripper, for instance. So just wanted to bring that up. Actually, pretty interesting stuff. So that's our lecture. Thanks for hanging in there with me, and I hope you got something out of it. Have a good week, and I look forward to reading your discussion posts.